Um, okay, everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers and everybody for having me here to give this presentation. Again, I'm Kyle Hood from the BEA, and you'll be hearing joint work that has been done by Abe Dunn, Alex Dreesen, and Andrea Batch, who are all also at the BEA. And I need to share my screen. Okay. And I would like to say that the opinions that are expressed here in this talk are those of me and my co-authors, and not of the BEA and of or of the Department of Commerce. So let's get started if I can. Okay. So in terms of motivation, once the pandemic started, we started seeing social distancing, shutdown orders, etc. And the BEA knew that members of the federal system were going to have to respond quickly to these large shifts. There were really two reasons for this need. The first is we knew that things were happening quickly in mid-month. So we wanted some fast indicators or some high frequency indicators. There was also a little bit of concern about, how surveys were going to be conducted. That turned out to be a little bit unfounded, but there was a concern at the beginning. So to respond to this, we considered using data on card transactions, credit cards, debit cards, etc. Because the data are very timely. The delay is only a couple of days, and they're high frequency, they're daily, and they exhibit a relatively fine level of granularity. In this case, the 3-digit NAICS-based industries. So just an overview of where I'm going to go in this talk. I'm going to give an overview of this data source. I'll touch on our model, and then I'm going to provide an overview of the estimates, sort of what we did. Then I'm going to move on. We did a little bit of a retrospective exercise, so we're going to look at a comparison of the card data and the source data that we normally use, and we find that the card data were more informative than some of the pre-pandemic evidence had suggested, and so we'll give a brief interpretation of these results, and then I'm going to give an overview, a very brief overview of our current projects and some important questions that we're trying to think through when exploring these new data sources, as well as answers to those questions. So on to the data that we're looking at here. The card transaction data come from Fiserv, which is a leading card transaction intermediary. It processes over $2.6 trillion in card transactions annually. Each observation in the data that they have is a card swipe or like a credit, debit, or a gift card, or an online transaction. Now we don't see each card swipe or online transaction. We're going to refer anybody who's listening to the Dunn et al. Paper in 2020 to get more details on this. The data series that we see were constructed using this methodology by the Federal Reserve Board and Palantir, which is a data science company. I think the key things about this are the 13-month rolling panel methodology, which only uses firms that have been in the sample for at least 13 months, and then there's some benchmarking that's done based on the 2012 economic census, and this is going to produce the more stable and informative series that we use. It's basically like constructed like a within firm series. The data, of course, all data have some limitations. Obviously, these may not be representative. The sample may not be representative of the population. There's very variable coverage across the categories, and entry and exit are a little. We're not exactly sure why firms enter or exit the sample. So those are some limitations. The method we're going to use, I'm not going to go into too many details, partially because it's pretty simple. We're just looking to reduce to eliminate some trends and some seasonality. So it's just a regression on um, to get rid of those things. We know that there are some ways to deal with seasonality and daily data, but at the time we just wanted to get something out quickly, so we kind of use this as a compromise. So now I'm going to show a few, like just show an overview of the data and the results of our regression exercise. The only graph I'm really going to show on the raw data is this one. This is the series that the Fiserv method produces for the aggregate rate of change in the Fiserv data versus the monthly retail trade. And of course, you can see that while there is some seasonality in it, they kind of overlay very closely. As you drill down into the industry and state detailed categories, this correlation isn't quite as good, and we'll show you that later. But in terms of the levels, the correlation is actually quite good across the board. Okay, so on to the results. So what I'm going to show you here is a sequence of 7 slides that show similar pairs of graphs for different spending categories, and you can kind of see what the data are able to show us. The horizontal axes, of course, here are dates, and the vertical axes are a percent difference from the expected level in the pandemic. So just think of these as sort of exponentiated log differences. And the start date for our model is February 25th, 2020. So here we're going to see a spike in spending. Oh, sorry. The one thing I forgot to mention, the vertical red line there is the date on which the pandemic was declared. So here you see a spike in spending immediately after the pandemic declaration, especially obvious in the daily data, but it's obvious in both. That's sort of when people were stocking up on toilet paper and other necessities. And then a drop in spending, but then you notice that after the drop, it doesn't quite go down to zero, so spending stays pretty steady above the pre-pandemic levels. Here's gas stations. Here you see a drop in spending even perhaps before the pandemic was declared, that bottoms out around 50% below pre-pandemic levels. Back of the envelope calculation suggests us about 50% quantity and 50% price. Then after April, you see a rise in spending pretty steadily up through the summer months, which goes until the end of 2020, and then another rise in spending starting at the end of 2020. Here's clothing stores. Just note the scale difference. Clothing stores actually drop a lot, about 75% below pre-pandemic levels. But then they show a recovery through July that gets you back up to maybe through June, that gets you nearly back up to the pre-pandemic levels. Here's ambulatory healthcare. This is doctor's visits, etc. This shows a big drop after the pandemic was declared as well. We do see in the top graph, we do see a significant daily pattern that's left over in the data. This is probably because people put off, optional doctor's visits, but there might have been other reasons, such as COVID, that people needed to go to the doctor. So there's different weekly patterns. Clothing stores, accommodation is next. Accommodation is going to be really hard hit by the pandemic. We're going to be more than 80% below pre-pandemic levels. We got a recovery in accommodation from that through the summer, but it still didn't go above 50%. And then at the very end, you see maybe a little tick up toward the 2021, but nothing. Yeah, but still well below pre-pandemic levels. Similar restaurants showed a huge drop, about 70%, then steady increase, um, eh, but still well below pre-pandemic levels, and then a small increase at the very end toward as we got into the spring and summer of 2021. And then this is the aggregate here. So that shows both effects. It shows the increase right after the pandemic, because the food and um, the first category that we looked at, the food and beverage stores, is actually quite large. And then the drop, that's the drop from all the other stuff, starts to dominate, and then a recovery in spending. Okay, so this is just a sample of the website that we put together that shows these when we release these data. Now it's cut off. I couldn't get the whole thing on there, but there's several of these daily spending graphs, and you can see that now that instead of the graphs I showed you, which only go until May, these ones are going up until just a few days ago. You can also sign up for updates, get links to our research papers, and get the contact info of me, Abe Dunn, and the other authors. You can and you can download the monthly and weekly series as well in spreadsheet form. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of experience of developing these card estimates. You know, after the initial pandemic declaration, we released this working paper and initial results in late April. So it took us just over a month. And we also used the data to inform some of our estimates of consumption expenditures. That wasn't my job, but I know that we did, we at least looked at some of them. Then in June, we began releasing the regular updates on the website, and first on a biweekly basis, and then on a weekly basis. And so we believe it was sort of familiarity with the data sources that enabled this deployment to be so quick. We've been working with these data for a few years for other forecasting projects and use cases, like this machine learning project we did with Jeff Chen, who used to be a PEA, in 2019. And so we were able to anticipate which categories would perform relatively well, and we knew how to get the data, and we knew how to use them. After this, after we sort of did this exercise and released these data, we wanted to sort of look back and see how well the data mimicked the standard series, the quarterly services survey that we use for our consumption of services estimates, and the monthly retail trade survey. So we took the Fiserv data, we collapsed them to month and quarters, we seasonally adjusted them directly, and then we compared the correlations before the pandemic with those during the pandemic period for a selection of these series. And what you can see is, which I think many people here would anticipate, is, so the green line is the pre-pandemic, the blue bars are the pre-pandemic correlations, and the orange bars are the post-pandemic correlations. And what we see is that before the pandemic, that we would have some of these correlations are negative between the quarterly services survey series and the Fiserv series, whereas they all are approximately 1 during the pandemic period. The same thing is true during with the retail series, although the difference isn't quite as stark. So just to summarize that, prior to the pandemic, we see these low correlations in growth rates. We just used it anyway, and then after the pandemic, the correlations were much higher. So during less volatile times, the idiosyncratic factors are dominant, but then in more volatile times, the economic signal dominates. Okay, so I think I'm running low on time, so I think I can kind of wrap it up here. BEA is exploring several avenues, and so there are benefits to working with these data before the pandemic, and the card data during the pandemic performed a little bit better than expected. Um, I want to briefly go over some of the work that we're doing now. Um, we are also exploring some nowcasting for the PCE services estimates, which are the ones that might be the most benefit the most from getting an early estimate. So we're employing model selection and model averaging techniques and more traditional nowcasting models, but we're trying to fold in these new alternative data. Then we're also doing some exploratory work and future projects. So we have new data sources, looking for alternative private data products. We found a couple that we're trying to work with, as well as partnerships with other organizations that have found uh, interesting data to work with. And then, we're looking at using these Fiserv card data for subnational estimates of private consumption or for other subnational series. So just sort of an ongoing work with these data that we're doing. And I think I'm going to end it there. So thank you very much.